This podcast may not be suitable for young listeners.
Chapter 13, Ghosts in the Snow. He will win who knows when to fight and when not to fight. Sun Tzu. 11:30 hours, 19 November. Clark awoke with Dr. Olivetti standing over him. She looked tired and had dark circles under her eyes like she hadn't slept in some time. "It's good to see you awake, Captain," she said. "I made it," he said in relief. "I didn't think I would." "Well, technically you didn't," she said. "You collapsed before you reached the door. Lieutenant Elliot and Master Sergeant Gideon pulled you out of the snow and brought you in." "I'll have to thank them," said Clark. "Looks like I'm out of a couple of good bottles of scotch." He started to sit up. "Hold on there, cowboy," said Dr. Olivetti. "You aren't ready to sit up. You've taken a lot of punishment over the last couple of days. You need to take a little while to heal." "I need to get to sit rep and find out what the hell's going on," he said, continuing to get up. "Don't you dare rip those ribs open again," she said, shaking her head. "They're put together now with good strong sutures, no more staples." "That's good," he said. "Why does my chest hurt?" "It's because your body armor almost stopped an arrow," she said. "It only dug into your sternum and cut your chest bad enough to take a dozen stitches to fully close. Also, I think the force of the impact likely bruised or fractured several of your ribs. I won't know until I can get a chest x-ray." "Thanks, Doc," he said, swinging his legs off the bed. "Captain," she said, her tone stern, "I do not recommend you get out of bed. You've put yourself through the meat grinder. You need time to heal." "I'll heal when we're out of the field," he said, reaching for his pants. "Now, if you don't mind turning around, I'd like to get dressed." "Suit yourself, Captain, but I want it known that I was against you getting up." "Noted," said Clark, slipping his feet into his pants. A few minutes later, he limped into the command module. He was pale, but determined to get back to the fight. "What the hell are you doing up?" asked Sanders. "Getting back to the fight, sir," said Clark, grinning. Standing in the room were Saunders, Hammond, Elliot, Gideon, and Wilder. Of the people in the room, only Gideon and Elliot appeared unhurt. "You should probably still be in bed, son," said Hammond. Gesturing at the room, Clark gave him his best smile. "So should most of you," he said. "Fair point," said Saunders. "Fine, you can stay, but if you start getting lightheaded or feel like you're going to faint, say something." "Will do," said Clark. "Can anyone give me a sit rep?" Saunders nodded at Wilder. She nodded and activated the main monitor. "The storm is starting to wind down," said Wilder. "We expect it to clear our area in the next couple of hours. The wind has died down too, to the point where we decided to launch a small observation drone. We were pleasantly surprised with the results." "It looks like your plan worked," said Saunders, gesturing at the screen. "Both clans or factions or whatever you call them have gone after each other. They're kicking the hell out of each other 2 ridges over. Your theory about where the second group was located was pretty close, too. You got the right general vicinity, just a little farther down than you thought." "Well, at least we know where they are," said Clark. "Were you able to find any trace of the downed drone?" "Nothing so far," said Wilder. "It has to be underground. Anywhere above ground and the satellite tracking system would have been able to locate it." "Then it's got to be in one of those big goddamn caves," said CSM Hammond. "That's the only thing that makes sense." "Not the only thing," said Clark. "What about if it had gone down in the water?" "Depending on how deep it was," said Wilder, "it might affect the satellite tracking. I don't think this lake is deep enough to do that." "Then we're looking in the wrong spot," said Clark. "Those drones are almost as big as a fighter jet. There has to be debris or a crash site we're missing." "If there is," said Hammond, "then it's buried under 3 feet of snow." "Is our drone still in the air?" asked Clark. "Yeah," said Saunders. "We're just about to call it back. Why? What do you have in mind?" "Whatever it is," said Wilder, "we'll have to make it fast, sir. The battery is running low, and we're going to have to recharge it soon." Do we have time for one quick sweep? Asked Saunders. If we make it fast, said Wilder, in less than 10 minutes we have to bring her back or risk losing it completely. Margin for error, said Saunders. Let's make it 5. We might need that drone again. Fair enough, said Clark. Bring up the topo map and I'll show you where to make your run. Wilder did as instructed and brought up the topographical map of the entire area. Clark studied it for a moment before pointing at a section. Here, he said, it's southeast of our position. The Box Canyon, right here. I think that's our best place to start. Valhalla Control to Frankie, said Wilder, radioing the drone pilot. I'm sending you the coordinates for a new sweep. Begin as soon as you're clear. Over. Frankie here, said Tech Sergeant Melissa Swift Eagle. Coordinates received. I'm beginning my run. Over. Copy, Frankie, said Wilder. We're clear to return to base as soon as the sweep is complete. Over. Copy, Valhalla Control, said Swift Eagle. Beginning my run. Watch your screens for the telemetry feed. Frankie out. Wilder brought up 3 different screens. One for the live video, one for thermal, and the third overlaid terrain data. It was clear that there was a lot of activity in and out of the Box Canyon from all of the tracks in the snow. There were large mounds of snow that blocked the canyon from certain approach angles. From the thermal, you could tell that they were huge boulders. Looking at them from above, you could tell that they weren't there naturally. They were arranged in a defensive pattern. They were there to provide cover and form defensive positions against an attack on the valley. There were even heat patterns in the screen indicating that there were creatures hidden behind them. Any chance they can see the drone? Asked Clark. Maybe, sir, said Wilder, but it's high enough that they likely think it's a bird if they even notice it at all. Good, said Saunders. We don't want them to shoot down our eye in the sky. Can you zoom in here? Said Clark, gesturing to a spot where the tracks all seemed to meet. Yes, sir, said Wilder. Instantly, the image shifted and began enhancing the selected area. At first, all they saw was tracks disappearing beneath the snow covering. And then the image cleared and they saw it. 4 large tree trunks had been driven into the ground and a series of animal hides had been formed together like an awning. It came down at an angle and almost completely obscured the entrance to the large cave. It was much larger than the cave where they found Barnes and Morales. If it hadn't been for the tracks in the snow, they never would have found it. There it is, said Clark. There's the cave. Those things are smarter than I thought, said Saunders. Do you think they did that to hide the entrance from the air? It's doubtful, said Clark. I don't think they understand that we can watch them from above. I bet you get close, you'll see that the awning is angled down and slopes in both directions. It keeps the snow from piling up in the mouth of the cave and makes it hard to see from the tops of the ridges. The fact that it hides it from the air is just luck. I think he's right, said Gideon. They don't seem to be advanced enough to figure out what aircraft are. Patrols on the ridges, sure, but not aircraft. I'd agree with Clark's assessment. I'd put a month's pay on that drone being inside that cave, said Clark. The problem is, said Saunders, we have no idea how many of those things are in there and how many of us it would take to retrieve the drone. The drone's too big for us to move, said Hammond. We couldn't drag that heavy bastard out of there without a good-sized vehicle. We certainly couldn't do it by hand. Then our only choice is to verify that it's there, said Clark, and destroy it where it sits. If you can get close enough to it, said Wilder, you could access the control panel on it and set the auto-destruct. All of our drones have one built in to prevent it from being captured. I'm sure they would have used it if they hadn't lost contact with the computer. Assuming they didn't want it back so bad that they were unwilling to sacrifice their prototype weapon, said Clark, whatever it is. We have enough break in the storm for me to contact base, said Saunders. I'll advise them of the situation and see what General Dalton has to say. If the Air Force refused to allow it to be destroyed, we might have a problem. Not if we blow it up without asking, said Clark. Don't give them the chance to deny it. We have to, said Saunders. They won't give us the destruct codes if they want it taken intact. Shit, said Clark, frowning. I'll advise Dalton and let him make the call, said Saunders. He won't want to waste the lives of our team on a bullshit recovery mission, not when we've already taken a beating out here. I'm going to make some coffee, said Gideon. Who wants a cup while we wait? That drew nods from the group, and he started getting water for the coffee pot. Saunders headed for the communications room to make the call, and Wilder contacted Frankie and instructed them to return the drone for recharge and to have it ready, just in case they needed it again. Leaning back in his chair, Clark winced in pain as his ribs brushed against the arm of the chair. He rubbed his chest and then rubbed his forehead while closing his eyes. You still hurting, son? Asked Hammond. I'll live, said Clark, without opening his eyes. I know that, said CSM Hammond. You're one hard-to-kill son of a bitch. I'm glad you're on our side. Thanks, said Clark unenthusiastically. You know, it might not be in there, said Hammond. It might be a cave we haven't even found yet. If it's not in there, said Clark, then we're going to play hell finding it with all this snow on the ground. Then they might have to wait until spring to find the goddamn thing, said CSM Hammond. I don't think those things are going to sell it to the Russians before we can recover it. Clark chuckled at that and then winced and held his ribs. Shit, he said with a groan. Don't make me laugh. Sir, said Wilder, I think we might have a break in the storm. Part of the cell seems to be breaking off. We could feasibly call in the medevacs in the next hour. That's good news, said Clark. We need to make sure they're bringing in the resupply of ammo, too. I made sure they were well aware of our equipment needs, sir, said Wilder. I sent a full list of gear and supplies along with a list of additional items like medical kits and replacement armor that we need. Gideon walked over and handed Clark a mug of fresh coffee. Clark accepted with a grateful nod and took a sip before easing back into his chair. Any words from the boss? Asked Gideon, sliding into his chair. Not yet, said Clark. He's still on the horn with command. Considering the beating we've taken, I can't imagine it's a pleasant conversation. So what's your plan? Asked Gideon. What plan? Asked Clark, glancing at Gideon over the rim of the coffee cup. The one you're already working on to go after that drone, said Gideon. I saw it in your eyes when we hit pay dirt with the drone. The moment we found that cave, your mind was already planning approach angles. I'm still working on it, said Clark with a grin. Well, whatever you're working on, said Gideon, your window is getting smaller. When the weather breaks, they'll risk getting a bird in here for the wounded. They won't risk pulling out the mimics until the weather breaks completely. That's likely not going to happen for about 36 hours, according to the weather report. Then I guess I'd better get to work, said Clark. If we fail to secure that drone, they're going to pull us out and replace us. I won't let us fail a mission on my first outing. It ain't going to happen. I knew I could count on you, sir, said Gideon, smiling. To fully understand what we're up against, said Clark, we've got to understand why they took the drone in the first place. That's an interesting question, said Gideon. What possible reason could they have for taking it? They can't fly it. They can't use the weapon systems. They can't eat it. Why would they want it? That's the $50 question, replied Clark. There's got to be a reason we're overlooking. Maybe they're worshiping it, suggested Elliot. That's possible, said Clark, but I think there's more to it than that. They're primitive, but they didn't have a problem putting Snakebite 6-1 out of the air. If they would have thought it was some kind of god, then they wouldn't have attacked it. What about taking it as a trophy? Asked Wilder. Again, maybe, said Clark. Both of those are definite possibilities, but my gut still says that isn't it. That drone weighs a hell of a lot and would have been hard to drag. I can't imagine it would have been easy to do. Take a piece, sure, but that's a lot of work for a trophy. Sorry to interrupt, sir, said Wilder. We might have a problem. What is it? Asked Clark, getting to his feet. Motion sensors are detecting movement, sir, she said, coming from the northeast, multiple contacts. Any idea how many? Asked Gideon, getting up to follow Clark. I'm showing at least a dozen, sir, said Wilder. They're not moving fast, but they're on a direct course for us. Get your gear, said Clark, nodding at Gideon and Elliot. Get Team 2 geared up and ready in 2 minutes. Wilder, how long till they get here? They're still some distance away, she said, and not moving very fast. Maybe 15 minutes at the most, assuming they don't change speed. I want Valkyrie and Hemdall on the roof, said Clark. I want them on overwatch. I'll take Team 3 up there, said Elliot. We'll get the Mark 19s ready in case they need another lesson. Copy that, said Clark. Everyone move. Let's get ready for a fight. Clark headed for the area set aside as officers' quarters and started grabbing his gear. Where do you think you're going? Asked Dr. Olivetti, sticking her head into the room. We've got more of those creatures heading our way, said Clark. It's all hands on deck. You're in no shape for a fight, she said, frowning. I'm in better shape than Saunders and Hammond, said Clark. Someone has to lead the teams in the field. You're never going to heal if you don't take it easy, Captain, she said, folding her arms across her chest. Well, I can't take it easy as long as we're in danger, said Clark. I'll rest when we're clear. When we're done with this mission, I have a feeling we're going to be down for a while. We've lost almost a quarter of the team, and we're going to be rebuilding for months. I'm afraid you're probably right, she replied. Some of the wounded will be in rehab for a long time. A few won't return at all. In all likelihood, you will have to replace 18 to 20 people, depending on how a few of the surgeries go. That many will take time to replace and to train, said Clark. Team Odin is going to be running short for a while. Clark started slipping into his cold weather gear and armor. I'll leave it to you then, she said, heading out the door. Try not to end up in the infirmary this time. No promises, Doc, said Clark, slipping into his boots. By the time Clark arrived at the armory, Staff Sergeant Hall was already handing out weapons to Team 2. Gideon was behind the counter assisting with the distribution. Clark stood at the back watching the team collect their gear. Shit, said Margolin. Is this all the ammo we get? We're running out, said Clark. Once the choppers get here, we'll be fine. In the meantime, make every shot count. Copy that, boss, said Margolin. If I run out of ammo, I'll try to snap off a couple of nasty insults before they kill me. Team 2, shouted Clark. Stack up by the main entrance. I'll be with you in a minute. Form up on Master Sergeant Gideon. Hooah, shouted Team 2 in unison. As the team began filing away, Clark noticed Valkyrie standing back from the others. He had a feeling she wanted to speak with him. Once everyone headed out, he walked over to her. Is everything all right? He asked as he approached. I wanted to tell you to be careful, sir, she said. I'll cover you as best I can. If these things are coming for another fight, I'm not sure we have enough ammo to give it to them. Motion sensors are only tracking about a dozen, said Clark. As long as more don't show up unexpectedly, I think we can handle a dozen. Good luck, sir, said Valkyrie. I've got Overwatch. I think I can safely recommend that you should add another sniper to the team. 2 of us can cover a lot more ground than 1. This mission has pointed out several glaring gaps in our defense, he replied. We'll do better next time. Yes, sir, she said with a nod. Good luck, Valkyrie, said Clark, returning the nod. Clark watched her go for a moment. There was something more there that he wasn't sure about. Shaking his head, he headed to the control module. Wilder was there along with CSM Hammond and Saunders. Can I get an update? Asked Clark as he checked the load on his SIG NGSWAR. Satisfied that it was loaded and ready to go, he glanced back up. Well, it's still snowing, said Wilder. The current temperature is 5 degrees Fahrenheit with a wind chill of -2. I'm showing a total of 15 of these creatures approaching. They're still just over 100 meters away in the trees. They're not trying to hide. There's still too much snow in the air for the cameras, but the thermals are working fine. Good, said Clark. Thanks. What did headquarters say? The last question was directed at Saunders. I spoke with General Dalton personally, said Saunders. He wasn't happy when I gave him the damage and casualty report. I didn't expect he would be, said Clark. "The good news is," said Saunders, "he's pissed at the Air Force for not providing more support. He's also put Team Yole on standby to come in to assist. We're not to abandon the mission. We're getting the supplies we requested, plus a bit more. He told me that when he approached the Air Force about destroying the drone, they said that under no circumstances were we to destroy this prototype. They didn't care what resources we had to expend to get their gear back. Well, that pissed the general off. He doesn't like the wingnuts telling him that we're expendable so long as we recover their shit. That's essentially what he told them. He said find it and secure it if we can. If not, blow the bastard up. If the Air Force doesn't like it, then they can take it up with the Joint Chiefs." "So we're greenlit to blow it up if we can't recover it," said Clark. "I'm just clarifying." "Affirmative," said Saunders. "Find it and blow the bastard to hell. There's no way in hell we can recover it, not without heavy vehicles and possibly armor. If it's underground, then maybe not even then." "Sir," said Wilders, "the creatures are at 50 meters. "Copy," said Clark, heading for the door. "Time to deploy the welcoming committee." "Watch your ass out there, son," said Hammond. Clark nodded as he ducked through the hatch leading into Section 1. Once he entered, he found Team 2 stacked and ready. Clark took his position at the head of the stack and nodded. "We move out in a semicircle around the door," said Clark, 10 meters out in short intervals. "Stay close and cover each other's backs. I'm sure Gideon already gave you the stack orders. We move in 10 seconds. Everyone activate comms and let's move." "Hooah!" roared the team. Activating the lock, Clark pushed the door open and went out first. He headed directly toward the tree line where the creatures should be emerging. Gideon deployed right beside him while the others took their positions, stacking on both sides. The snow was almost to his waist as Clark pushed out 10 meters from the entrance and held his ground. "Lock and load," he said into the mic. All down the line he heard the sounds of charging handles being pulled and rounds racking into chambers. Clark kept his weapon at low ready as he waited for the creatures to emerge from the trees. The snow was still falling steadily, but the driving wind had died down. Visibility was clearer than it had been before, and he could see the trees from where he stood. Seconds later, the first creature emerged from the trees. It stood there for a moment as if waiting for their reaction before proceeding. It held a long spear and had a bow slung over its shoulder. It wore a kilt-type garment around its waist that appeared to be made from the hide of an elk or buffalo. In its belt were 2 of the great stone knives. It was massively built and covered in thick, dark brown hair. One by one, the others appeared from the trees. They were all armed, but did not attempt to raise a weapon in a threatening manner. They just stood there, staring at them in silence. It was more than a little unnerving, and after a long moment, Clark heard a soft voice to his left. He knew instantly it was Margolin. "If you're going to stare at me," he muttered, "you might as well kiss me, too." "Shut up, jackass," said another voice. "There's no telling what kind of diseases you'd give those poor sons of bitches." Clark was happy that his baklava hid his smile. "Knock it off," snapped Gideon. "Keep it together. This could turn ugly any second." "Sorry, Top," said Margolin. The first creature that stepped out said something that they couldn't quite make out. The other creatures shuffled nervously but did nothing. Then the creature that spoke started walking toward Clark. "Hold," snapped Gideon. "No one move." The creature kept coming, and the closer it got, the bigger it seemed. By the time it was 10 feet from Clark, it was clear that it towered over him. The beast had to be well over 8 feet tall. It stood there looking down at him with an odd look on its face. The spear was still grasped firmly in its right hand, but it made no move to use it. It stood there staring directly at Clark for a long moment before it slowly raised its left hand and opened it, palm extended and empty. And then it jammed the shaft of the spear down into the snow and let it go. It remained standing upright. The tip of the spear was about a foot over the beast's head. That meant the spear had to be right at 10 feet long. Once it was sure the spear would remain standing, it extended its right hand and held it palm out and open. "What the fuck?" whispered Margolin. "I think it wants to talk to you, sir," Gideon said to Clark. "Okay then," said Clark. "Let's see what happens." Clark lowered his rifle and let it hang by the single-point strap. Once it was hanging, he held out his hands in front of him, matching the creature's movements, hands out with palms open, showing empty. The creature glanced up and down the line slowly. "Lower your weapons," Clark instructed. Reluctantly, Team 2 followed suit. "I've got you covered, sir," said Valkyrie. "Got the big guy in my sights." The creature met Clark's gaze and nodded slowly after Team 2 had lowered their weapons. "Showa ka," said the creature. The thick teeth and lips made the beast's pronunciation seem almost a growl, but Clark thought it was trying to say something. Making another motion with its open palms, slightly waving them to indicate his hands were still empty, it repeated the phrase, "Showa ka." "I think it's saying it's not here for a fight," said Gideon. "I think it wants to talk." "Well, that's kind of what I was thinking too," said Clark. Slowly, the creature reached over and picked up the spear. It made sure it wasn't moving too fast or in a threatening manner. When he saw that Clark didn't go for his gun, it brought the spear out in front of itself and held it crosswise, like a staff. Then it leaned forward and offered it to Clark. Clark hesitated, but he took the spear. The shaft was as big around as the wide end of a softball bat, and he was surprised at the weight. It had to weigh close to 40 pounds. Accepting the spear with a nod, the creature released its grip and stood back to its full height. Taking the spear and standing in the snow just as the creature did, Clark glanced over at Gideon. "You think I should return gift for gift?" asked Clark. "Well, I'm not an anthropologist," said Gideon, "but I would think that would be the right thing to do. Give him your gladius." "Good idea," said Clark. Unhooking the sword from his belt, he held it out to the creature, just as it had done for him. It reached out slowly and took the offered sword. At first it looked confused, but then it dawned on it that it was able to sheathe like his own knife. The sword looked like a dagger in the beast's massive hands, but it wrapped its fingers around the hilt and drew the blade. At first it looked at it quizzically until it tapped the blade. The ping of the steel made its eyes grow wide with surprise. "I think it likes your gift," said Gideon. The creature stuck the sword back into its sheath and slipped it through its belt. Then it took a step forward toward Clark and knelt in the snow. Clark forced himself not to react. The beast held up its hands again to show it meant no harm. Clark nodded, and it continued with what it was doing. Using the tip of its fingers, it drew a crude drawing of a lightning bolt in the snow. Clark remembered that was the same drawing that had been on the territorial marker. And then it pointed towards itself, and then at the others, and then back at the lightning bolt. "I think he's saying their clan lightning bolt," said Clark, "or whatever their word is for lightning." Clark nodded that he understood. Then the creature pointed in the direction of the other clan. Drawing in a fresh patch of snow, it drew a crude image of a buffalo. "I think the other clan is called Buffalo," said Clark. Drawing an arrow from its quiver, it held it out for Clark to inspect. It was made just as he remembered, stone-tipped and painted with crude paints. He saw what the creature was pointing at. On the shaft of the arrow was drawn in blue pigment an image of a lightning bolt. Then it drew another arrow. This time, Clark immediately saw the difference. The pigments used were red, and on the shaft was a tiny red buffalo. That wasn't the only difference. It wasn't stone-tipped. It had a tip made from metal. It was aluminum with blue paint on it. Clark held out his hand, and the beast gave him the arrow to look at it more closely. Clark studied the tip. "Why does this look so familiar?" asked Clark. "Mind if I take a look?" asked Gideon. Clark handed him the arrow, and he began studying it. I think this is aircraft-grade aluminum, said Gideon. I think they used a piece of the downed drone to make this. Motherfucker, said Margolin. That's why they wanted the goddamn thing. Makes sense, said Clark. When your enemy has stone knives and arrowheads, aluminum blades and arrowheads give you an unbelievable advantage. Clark turned back to the other creature and pointed at the snow, and then he traced a crude drawing of an aircraft in the fresh spot. The creature studied it for a moment before snorting and looking at Clark. It pointed to the sky and made a motion with its hand showing it fell and plowed into the ground. Then it pointed towards where it had indicated the Buffalo clan lived. I think he's saying that the drone crashed and the Buffalo clan took it, said Clark. Seems like what we were already thinking, said Gideon. Clark pointed at the image of the drone and then clapped himself on the chest. He pointed at the drone image and then all of them. He was trying to convey to the creature that the drone belonged to them. The creature watched him and nodded. I think he understands, said Clark. Then it did something unexpected. It said something that sounded familiar to Clark. It was guttural and had a slight growl at the end, but it was a word. Sigwa, it said. That sounds like a language I've heard before, said Clark. Valhalla to Thunder God, said Wilder over the radio. Can you get him to say it again? Over. Clark was surprised that she'd even been listening. Copy that, he replied. I'll try. Leaving the mic open, Clark pointed at the drawing again. The creature looked at him for a moment and then repeated the word. Sigwa, it said. I'm playing it back, said Wilder. It sounds Native American to me. Can you look it up? Asked Clark. Negative, replied Wilder. We don't have a good enough signal for any kind of computer access. We have a couple of Native Americans on the team, suggested Gideon. Maybe play it over the speakers and see if anyone recognizes the word. That's not a bad idea, said Clark. I'll see what I can find out, said Wilder. They waited a few moments before Wilder got back to them. Valhalla to Thunder God, she said. We might have a possible match. Tech Sergeant Swift Eagle is one of our drone pilots. She's Cherokee and says the word means bird if she's hearing it correctly. I think she is, said Clark. Can you get her suited up into my position as fast as possible? Affirmative, Thunder God, said Wilder. She's suiting up now. A few minutes later, Tech Sergeant Swift Eagle joined Clark near the creature. It took Clark a moment to explain to her what was going on, but she grasped the concept quickly. She seemed taken aback by the creature, but accepted it after a moment. After all, she'd been a part of the defense when they attacked Valhalla. Clark waited while she had a stilted conversation with the creature. She was very animated when she turned back to him. This creature speaks Cherokee, she said excitedly. I mean, it knows certain words and phrases. It doesn't speak it well, but it does understand more than it speaks. Okay, but what did it say? Asked Clark. From what I was able to gather, she said, it wants us to leave and to take the strange bird with us. By the way, his name is Ghost. Well, that's as close as I can get. It's literally spirit who walks among us. I can't pronounce it in his language. Ghost is close enough, said Clark. I think it means for us to take the drone, said Margolin. Of course it means the drone, you moron, said another voice. Clark ignored them both. Did you explain that's why we're here? Clark said. I tried, said Swift Eagle. I think it understood, but it's hard to say. It was a broken conversation. His Cherokee isn't great, and I don't speak whatever the hell he is. So can they give us directions, or at least confirm where the drone is? Asked Clark. I think they've offered to help us recover the drone, said Swift Eagle. Seriously? Asked Gideon. We're going to work with them? He says we can look at the arrows, said Swift Eagle. It wasn't his clan that attacked us. But his clan took Morales and Barnes, said Clark. He says that they took the females after they were attacked, said Swift Eagle. After they were attacked, said Clark. That's not what Bannerman said. Whatever happened, said Swift Eagle, the PJs did come onto their territory. But still, said Clark, they wiped out the rest of the PJ team. They're willing to help us recover the drone, she said with a shrug. All they want from us is to leave them in peace. And if we kick the shit out of their enemies at the same time, said Clark, then it's a bonus. We'll effectively end their territorial dispute for them. I think that's their plan, sir, said Swift Eagle. They help us, we help them. Tell them we're thinking about it, said Clark. We can't mount an attack until we get our supplies, but we'll go soon. How will we get in contact with them? I'll find out, sir, she said. While she returned to speak with the creature, Clark turned to Gideon. What do you think about this? He asked. If they're on our side, said Gideon, then we've got a much better chance of getting inside that cave. They want it gone, and so do we. If we blow it up inside that cave, I think we effectively put an end to the other clan. Especially if the explosion seals the cave, said Clark. Yes, sir, said Gideon. I do believe we have a plan, said Clark. Turning back to Swift Eagle, Clark waved to get her attention. Tell Ghost we have a deal, he said. Chapter 14, Extraction. This is no time for ease and comfort. It is time to dare and endure. Winston Churchill. 12:45 hours, 19 November. After returning his weapons to the armory, Clark headed straight into the control module. He'd already stowed the spear he'd been given by Ghost in one of the storage sections for when they got back to base. He wasn't quite sure what he was going to do with it yet, but he knew he was going to keep it. He slid into a chair and fought the urge to groan when his ribs hit the armrest. Gideon sat to his left and Hammond came over and sat at his right. Saunders was in the radio room, and Wilder was busy going over weather reports for the earliest moment that they could bring in the relief choppers. Hammond looked around the room comically before pulling a hip flask out of his pocket. He uncapped it, and he offered it to Clark. First drink's yours, he said softly. You've earned it, son. Clark took it without hesitation and took a pull from it. It wasn't the scotch he was expecting. It was strong Kentucky bourbon. Nodding his approval, he handed it back to CSM Hammond. Well, he said softly, since you've already had a drink, you can't put me on report for having one with you. Clark chuckled as CSM Hammond took a long swig and handed it to Gideon. He gratefully accepted and took a pull before handing it back. Better save the rest for later, said Hammond, putting the flask away. Now we only have some good cigars. You can't smoke in here, Command Sergeant Major, said Wilder without looking up. It'll mess with the fire suppression systems. Damn, said Gideon, putting away the silver cigar case he'd slipped out of his pocket. I'll take one of those if you don't mind, said Hammond. I'll save it for later. Gideon handed him the silver case, and Hammond smiled when he opened it. Do I even want to know how you got these? Asked Hammond. I have a friend, said Gideon with a smile. That's all I can say. Well, if a box of those find their way to my desk, said Hammond, I'll be a happy man. I'll make it happen, said Gideon, smiling. Christmas is almost here. I do love a good cigar, said Hammond. Rudyard Kipling once said, a woman is only a woman, but a good cigar is a smoke. I've always loved that quote. If either of you tells my wife, I'll have to shoot you. Both men laughed. The storm is finally breaking up, said Wilder, turning to face them. We should have clear skies within the hour. The birds will be lifting from Fort Chaffee. That's where they stage for the flight in. That's good news, said Clark. We need to get some of these people to a hospital. Saunders came limping into the command module from the comms room. He had a smile on his face. Elliot slipped in behind him and quietly took a seat. I've got some good news, said Saunders. Well, damn, Levi, let's hear it, said Hammond. Well, they're not taking any chances with the extraction of the wounded, said Saunders. We've got a few birds coming in, 3 Chinooks loaded with gear. There'll also be a medevac for the wounded. 4 Blackhawks will be on station as well. Plus, 4 additional Apaches will be on station to put down any attempt to bring down one of the birds. They're sending in 2 teams of PJs and the Blackhawks. The Air Force insists that they join us, so I told them that they're going to be under our command. General Dalton flexed his stars and got that one rammed down the Air Force's throats. They weren't happy about it, but the Joint Chiefs agreed with Dalton. So there's fuck all they can do about it. They're reinforcing us for the final push to recover the drone. Damn, said Clark. You're not kidding. They aren't playing around. One problem, though, said Saunders. The Air Force refused to give us the destruction codes for the drone. That's one thing the Joint Chiefs didn't overrule them on. It's their bird. However, it will be the decision of the teams on the ground whether the drone can be extracted or will have to be destroyed on site. But we have to make every attempt to recover it, said Clark, frowning. That's right, said Saunders. Neither myself nor Dave will be leaving with the wounded. We started this shit, we're going to finish it. We'll run operations from here. You will lead the field teams. Got it, said Clark. The PJs have to answer to me then? That's affirmative, said Saunders. They won't like it, but fuck 'em. They'll do what we say or get the fuck out of our sandbox. God damn, said Hammond. I don't think General Dalton made many friends today. He just pissed off a lot of Air Force brass. Yep, said Saunders. He said he'll take the heat if the Air Force doesn't like it. They can recover their own shit from now on. Glad he's got our back on this one, said Clark. I've been with this team now for a while, said Hammond, and I can say I've never seen a time when General Dalton didn't have our backs. He's a damn fine officer, and I don't say that often, especially on ranks that high. Most are just goddamn politicians once they make general. I would include most colonels in that statement, said Saunders. I'm not a ring knocker, so I'll probably never get above bird colonel. Hell, I'll be lucky if I get full bird. I don't give a shit about rank, said Clark. I don't care if they ever promote me. I'm where I want to be, with the teams. Spoken like a true enlisted man, said Gideon. That drew chuckles from all of them. Anyway, said Saunders, they should be lifting from Chaffee any time now. That should give the storm time to clear before they get here. So how are you supposed to contact Sasquatch when we're ready to roll? Asked Hammond. We'll send up a flare, said Clark. That's the signal they'll be looking for. They'll meet us at the section of the ravine where they encountered the first PJ team. Speaking of PJs, said Hammond, they're going to shit bricks when they see who our allies are on this mission. Yeah, said Clark, we're going to have to brief them before we go. I don't want one of them opening fire and turning this into a fight on two fronts. That's why I didn't want to have to take them on this mission, but we can't have everything. Once the team leaves Valhalla, said Saunders, we'll keep both recon and a comms drone in the air to keep constant contact with the teams. The only time we might lose you is when we go into the caves. Well, that's when things are going to get tricky, said Clark. I'm not thrilled about CQB with these things. That kind of range, they're going to rip people apart. Don't let them get that close then, said Saunders. Use Ghost and his team as shock troops. Let them brawl with each other and you pick off the bad guys. It's going to be tough telling them apart once their fur starts flying, sir, said Gideon. Chem lights, said Clark. What? Asked Hammond. We give each of the ones on our side a chem light, explained Clark. If we see a creature with a chem light, we don't shoot them. No chem light gets a bullet. Or several, added Gideon. Several works too, said Clark, whatever it takes to put them down. All right, folks, said Saunders. We have a plan. I suggest you all make whatever preparations you need to make before the arrival of the choppers. Brief teams 2 and 3 on their roles in this, then start making your assignments. I want to go over your game plan before the arrival of the choppers, and then we'll brief the PJs when they get here and place them where we need them. And with that, everyone headed out to start making preparations. Clark and Gideon called all of Team 2 to the small wardroom at the far end of the barracks section. Team 3 took over the storage and equipment locker on the second level. After the team had been briefed, Clark headed into the small room that had been designed for officers' quarters. Taking off his armor and shirt, he winced as he took off his T-shirt. Opening up his bag, he took out a roll of surgical tape and started wrapping his ribs and the wound on his side. The tape would give him enough extra hold to hopefully keep the wound from tearing open during the coming fight. It also would help with the pain in his rib cage. He wasn't about to let that keep him out of the fight, and he promised himself he would get an x-ray when he got back to base. "Everything okay, boss?" said a voice behind him. Clark turned and looked over his shoulder. Margolin was standing just outside the door looking in. "I'm just adding some tape to keep this cut from opening up again," said Clark. "What's up?" "Just a quick question, sir," said Margolin. "Shoot," said Clark. "Do you trust old, tall, dark, and hairy?" asked Margolin. "I mean, how do we know they won't turn on us as soon as this is over?" "Well, we don't," replied Clark, "but I've planned for that." "What do you have in mind, boss?" said Margolin. "You don't mind me asking." "I'm going to give all the ones on our side a chem light," said Clark. "I'm also planning on putting a GPS tag in the chem light. Then if they screw with us, we can track their every move." "Well, that should do the trick," said Margolin. "Good idea, sir." "Thanks," said Clark. "I do get a good idea occasionally." Margolin headed out while Clark finished taping his ribs. Once he was finished, he put all of his gear back into place and headed for the command module. He wanted to be on hand when the call came that the choppers were getting close, and Saunders approached him and motioned for him to take a seat. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, looking concerned. "Yeah," said Clark. "Why? Something wrong?" "Well, the reason we fought so hard to keep the PJs out," said Saunders, "is because troops that have never encountered these type of creatures tend to freak out when they do. Having them do that in the field is, well, less than ideal." "And if they do something stupid," said Clark, "they might get you all killed." Saunders finished the sentence. "I have to admit," said Clark, "I hadn't considered that." "We put our guys through months of preparation," said Saunders, "before they're allowed to deploy with the teams. You were an exception because you already knew these damn things were real, and you've had more training than most of the team." Clark just shrugged. "Don't shrug that off," said Saunders, chuckling. "You've got more trigger time than most people on this team. That's why I recruited you." "Thanks," said Clark, "I guess." "Don't thank me just yet," said Saunders. "You can thank me if those goddamn PJs don't turn this entire mission into a giant clusterfuck." "I'll do my best to keep that from happening," said Clark, "because if it does, it'll be all our asses in a sling." "Good," said Saunders, "because we both know damn good and well that shit goes from snafu to bohica damn fast." "We need to have a sit-down with the officers in charge of the PJ teams before we get out there," said Clark. "We need to know just how much they were told before they were sent out here. If they don't know what they're up against, then we can expect them to react badly." "Sir," said Wilder, "the birds are 15 minutes out." "Looks like it's time to get out there and cover," said Clark. "Team 3 is deploying now," said Wilder. "Lieutenant Elliott says he'll be online and ready in 3 minutes. "That's my cue," said Clark, downing the rest of his coffee. "Good luck, Dan," said Saunders. "Thanks, boss," said Clark, smiling as he headed for the armory. Team 2 was already there drawing weapons and ammo. "Look alive," shouted Clark. "Our birds are almost overhead and we've got to make sure they reach the nest without a hitch. We need that goddamn ammo. Can I get a hooah?" "Hooah!" shouted Team 2. "Hell yes," said Clark. "Stack by the door and be ready to move in 2 minutes. I'll join you as soon as I draw my gear." Clark watched the team heading for Unit 1 and the main entrance. As they were heading out, Clark heard Margolin talking to Sergeant Liam McGregor, Huntsman 29. "You think he's bringing guns, or do you think he and Gideon are going to do the shield wall thing again?" asked Margolin. "Man, I ain't never seen no shit like that before," said McGregor. "That shit was hardcore." Clark just smiled as he glanced at Gideon. Gideon just shook his head and then tossed Clark one of the 458 SOCOM rifles and started putting the other gear on the counter. Clark put the pistol on his belt along with a Gladius tomahawk and a sadly small amount of extra ammo. "Let's get moving," said Clark, nodding at Gideon. Right behind you, said Gideon, coming around the counter. Making their way through the command module, Sanders nodded. Watch your backs out there, boys, said Saunders. Copy that, said Clark, ducking through the door into Unit 1. Team 2 was already lined up, and Clark took his position at the front of the line. Team 2, listen up, roared Clark. The team instantly quieted down. We file out by the numbers, said Clark. From a perimeter at 20 meters out, 10 meters apart. Valkyrie and Heimdall with me. Shield Maiden and Runestone with Mjolnir. Raven, take Sage halfway down the line on the left. Eagle, take Bjorn halfway down the line on the right. Huntsman 2-3, 2-5, and 2-6 on the left flank. Huntsman 2-7, 2-9, and 2-10 on the right flank. Take your positions and sound off if you have contact. Let's move. Hooah! Shouted the team. They didn't have to say that Huntsman 2-4 and 2-8 were dead, and Huntsman 2-1 and 2-2 were being lifted on the choppers that they were about to provide cover for. No one was happy that there were 4 men down, but they weren't going to let each other down. The determination showed in their faces. Clark hit the unlock and was the first out the door. He went directly up the middle with Valkyrie and Heimdall at his side. They would be the point, and all the others formed up behind. Gideon stayed toward the middle of the formation with Runestone to run communications, leaving him and Shield Maiden to respond to any section of the line if they were needed, either for first aid or to bolster the line. No sooner had they taken their positions when the first 2 Apaches roared overhead. There was an aggressive thump of the rotors chopping through the cold mountain air. Clark noticed instantly that they were armed for bear with full missile pods. The 30mm autocannons mounted to the underside of the pilot was moving in unison with the direction the pilot's head turned. They were actively searching for threats to engage. "Fuck yeah!" shouted Margolin, pumping his fist in the air. Clark fought the urge to do the same. It was always exciting when the Apaches were there, especially when it was clear they were itching for a fight. The gunner on the nearest Apache looked directly at the team and snapped a salute. The choppers were low enough that they could see the smile on his face. "Reaper 2-1 to Valhalla," said a voice over the radio. "We're on station and ready to party, over." "Copy, Reaper 2-1, said Valhalla Actual. "Welcome to the middle of nowhere, over." 2 more Apaches streaked in from over the lake, their rotors beating out a violent staccato as it echoed through the canyon. Clark knew that the Apaches were designated Reaper 2-1 through 2-4. The Chinooks were Kingfisher 1-1 through 1-3, and the Blackhawks were designated Jackal 2-1 through 2-4. The Apaches would be the first on station and the last to leave. Clark listened as the other group of Apaches shot overhead and checked the surrounding area. Then he heard their radio call. "Reaper 2-1 to Kingfisher 1-1, said Reaper 2-1. "You are clear to approach." "Copy, Reaper 2-1, said Kingfisher 1-1. "We are inbound to Valhalla, ETA 2 minutes. "Valhalla copies," said Saunders. "Welcome parties are in place and crews are standing by to begin the transfer, over." "Roger, Valhalla," said Kingfisher 1-1. "See you on the deck, out." The 4 Apaches angled upwards and out, spiraling around the area at an altitude where it was doubtful the creatures could throw a tree, but well within range of the 30mm autocannons and missiles. They could hear the first of the Chinooks coming from over the frozen lake. Clark watched as they approached the mimic units from the back and began to hover before turning around and lowering the ramp onto the top of Level 1. Instantly, crews from the Chinook and Team 1 began offloading crates of supplies and ammunition. Clark saw green cargo containers that he knew held rifles. In minutes, they had the equipment offloaded, and they began loading the wounded onto the chopper. As soon as they reached capacity, the ramp began coming up and the chopper began climbing into the sky as it angled out over the lake. No one approached from the landward side to avoid presenting themselves as a target for the creatures. The first Chinook wasn't even out of sight before the second one began its approach. In seconds, it was lowering its ramp to take over where the first one had left off. Clark was impressed with the efficiency of the exchange. Soon the second chopper was lifting and the third began its approach. The third chopper was the most somber for them. Once it had finished offloading supplies, they began loading the black body bags with their dead. No one made any comments. Those were their teammates, their friends, and their family, brothers and sisters all. As the last Chinook made its way out over the lake, the first two of the Blackhawks approached. Instead of landing, they dropped ropes, and the teams of PJs began rappelling on top of the mimic units. They were far enough apart that they could unload two at a time, and in seconds they had dropped their teams and departed over the water, only to be replaced by the remaining two Blackhawks. Ropes descended and teams began to drop in. Although the PJ teams had been sent in to help, the looks on Team 2's faces told Clark that there was nothing but resentment there. They had just watched their brothers and sisters loaded into body bags. Now this new team arrives after the worst of the fighting was already done. It was unlikely that anyone, even the former PJs on Team 2, would welcome the new arrivals. Once the last Blackhawks departed, the Apaches took one more sweep of the area and began heading out over the frozen lake. One of the Apaches came in low over their heads and nearly touched down. Clark could see the pilot and co-pilot looking at Team 2 and both brought up crisp salutes. "Reaper 2-1 to ground team," said Reaper 2-1. "This is Thunder God, go ahead," said Clark. "We'll escort your people home," said Reaper 2-1. "We've got them from here, over." Clark returned the salute and noticed that everyone on Team 2 did the same. "Thank you, Reaper. Watch over them until we come home, over." "That's a promise, Thunder God," said Reaper 2-1. "Good hunting, out." And with that, Reaper 2-1 flew straight up almost 50 feet and then angled out over the lake, accelerating as they went. Reproduction of this audio in any way is prohibited under U.S. copyright laws without written approval. Stay tuned to the Dixiecryptid podcast for Codename Wild Hunt Book 2, Curse of the Wendigo.